Hello, everyone. Tracy here, your resident business rebel, and you're listening to Digital Business Your Way podcast, the show that lets true stories and insider secrets of online entrepreneur life unfold. Our business world is growing, and as an online business coach and digital product creator, I believe you didn't become an entrepreneur to grin and bear your way through business. So I'll be your guide as we drop in on coaching calls, have intimate sit downs with online personalities you love, and discuss ideas, opportunities, and strategies circulating our online world. So pop in your earbuds, tap follow, and join me as I demystify this thing called business.
It's that concept before of what you're saying is making the webinar something that regardless of whether they buy or not, they're still learning from you. It's still a great experience, whether or not they buy. And at the end, if you just focus on giving someone a great experience and learning something through that webinar, and then you just happen to give them an invitation on how they can learn more and work with you further at the end, it also takes the pressure out because you're not like, this webinar has to convert.
Hello, everyone. Tracy here, and welcome back to Digital Business Your Way. And today we've got a special episode, one that is often a fan favorite style when I bring in a lovely co host to drop you in on one of our insider conversations. We're going to tackle that beautiful launch mechanism called a webinar, right? Because, it goes by many names these days, but no matter what you want to call it, it serves an important purpose. And we're going to talk about, a lot of opinions and tech and style and feel and old versus new. All of the different pieces. This is something that Sue and I, we recorded it late last year, but I'm bringing it to you now because it is still relevant. And this is a conversation that it came up again just last week. And I thought, you know what? I got the perfect episode to bring everybody. So I'm going to drop you straight into our conversation. And as always, if you want to hear any more, if you have any other pieces that you want us to talk about, drop me a line, tracypatterson.com/AMA, and let me know your questions because we are here for it.
Today, what we're going to talk about is all things webinars. Webinars are one of those things that can sometimes feel like a bit of an almost old-fashioned relic from the past because there was a while where pretty much every single person in the entire world was doing webinars, and it's in some ways seems to have gone out of fashion, but we've got differing opinions about webinars. So this is just a chat between friends. So you get to sit in as we discuss and share our opinions on webinars. Are they good? Is it something that should be using? Are they just for sleazy bro marketers? Are they for everyday course creators who've never done a webinar before? Are there other things to do? What else are we going to talk about? All the things.
All the things. Yeah. And like for my kind of like headline opinion before we get into the details is for me, it's like the idea of the video and like the getting to know each other and having at least a quasi like live thing. I think that goes a long way towards hitting that know like trust, right, and like blazing through. But I think doing it the way, to your point about relics, where it basically seems like the online version of an infomercial, I
Yeah.
think that's the part that kind of ruins it for me. So there's my little like headline top stake my put my stake in the ground,
Yeah.
however
Yeah.
that phrase is supposed to be said on that one. And do you have like that overarching opinion about it before we like dive into the details?
Yeah, well, I am curious to know how many webinars you think you have attended in your life. I reckon I've probably attended, oh God, 50, 100, a lot of webinars. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes the reason they get such a bad rap is because we've attended so many shit webinars where we've basically sat through the sob story and the life story and, someone's rags to riches, stuff where it's kind of sets our BS radar off and you don't get the know, like, and trust. You just get the, is this
Yep.
person just trying to sell me something feeling? And I think
Right.
that's why they get, such a bad rap. So I think it's not so much the webinar. I think it's the content that people put into it. And it's about how webinars are going to evolve into the future and still be really helpful and relevant, but get away from the previous ick factor.
Yeah, yeah, and let's talk about that platform option there, because I think that's one of the evolutions. Whereas, like, the genuine and realness of the content, I think that is kind of always
Mm.
right. But whenever we think about like just that platform part, it's the Zoom versus a live on Instagram versus a TikTok. How would you even do that? Versus,
A
like
live stream.
what yeah, yeah, it's like live streamed to like 7 places at once,
Mm.
or, the ones that are, well, basically they're just straight fake live, right? Like they pretend
Yeah.
to be live, but they're not. And all the ones that also, like come like on the Demio and the Webbies and all of that kind of specialty,
Yeah.
webinar style format, aside from Zoom webinar, Zoom meetings. So what do you see as far as the actual platform options?
Mm.
That, like, do you see any trends, any changes? Do you think it's demographic based?
Yeah.
What are
Look,
your
I
tech
think
thoughts?
yeah, from the tech perspective, I think, there is still real value in having a live webinar and having people come and join you live. And I know from the perspective of presenting a webinar, sometimes it can feel like it's almost like a different energy when you're doing it live because there are people there. It's a bit more interactive. Even if you are getting stressed and you only check the questions at the end, people are there. And I think when you are pre-recording a webinar, that can still be really effective, but there's just something different. It's like there's just this different feeling and spark and something when something is being recorded live. So I definitely think there is value, even if you are taking that live recording and then turning it into an evergreen, which means that someone
Mhm.
can watch it whenever they want. I just think, yeah, if at all possible, recording that live can really make a difference and can just help with that connection. It just feels that little bit more connected. And there's probably not a specific, thing that I can point to say that's what makes it. I think it's just that experience of you doing something with people as opposed to talking to your camera. I think it changes the way you talk, the way you, react, the way you present, because you can't sort of check yourself. Like you're just having to do it. So I think there's that, but then there's also that what happens after the live webinar. And in terms of the tech of where you can do it, there are so many options. And you've got your Zoom, you can do it onto YouTube and put the YouTube video onto a page. Like you can even do things in software like StreamYard. Like it feels like there is a lot of tech options which are incorporating that webinar style and really, the only difference between a regular Zoom and like a webinar Zoom is that when people come into the room, they are muted and they can't come up into the call. So it's just you
Yeah.
on the screen. So, I have done webinars where I haven't even bothered with Zoom webinars and it's been more intimate and there's been less people. And it just means that people could unmute themselves and say something. And, it can be helpful if you have someone else in there who, if someone does leave their microphone off, they can unmute it. But that's kind of the main difference. And I think when you have hundreds or thousands of people, like having that specialized software is more helpful. But when you've got 10, 15, 20 people, it's less of an issue. And that is really the only sort of issue, that you don't want people kind of injecting themselves into your webinar
Joining you on
accidentally
stage.
sometimes. Yeah, which
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
happens. And but also being able to do that at the end, like with the question time, that's actually really helpful if
Mhm.
someone can put themselves on stage. So I think sometimes
Yeah.
it's easy to overcomplicate it because someone said this is what you need Demio to run a webinar, or you need like blah blah webinar platform. But in terms of evergreen, like sometimes it's that theory that you have to have this video that from a tech perspective, where everything is stripped out of the video in terms of the controls, like a traditional like broy style evergreen webinar. You don't give someone the option to fast forward, to pause, to
Yes.
double the
Oh my God, I
speed.
hate that. Oh, I hate
and
that.
and I think
Yes.
that that's like a
Ah.
reflection of where people's are changing, like and especially it's so important to pay attention to your audience, because if you've got an audience that is people that are really busy, they may not want to show up at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday to watch your webinar. They might want to watch it on the go. They might want to double speed it because that's what they do and they have it on in another window. And I know it's, like all the webinars are like, please make sure you pay attention and close down your browsers and all your devices. And it's like, no, thank you. I'm a multitasker. I'm going to be doing multiple things at once. And yes, I know what you're doing is important, but I'm trying to, it's not that
Yeah.
important that I'm only going to give you my attention.
Yeah, and I think that goes into appreciating and honoring different learning styles, right? And that
Absolutely.
and away from that kind of parental authority style of you
Yeah.
must sit there and listen, or you go to detention kind of thing. And
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
like, hey, we know a lot more about the brain now than we did even when I was in school. So,
Yeah.
it's like people have different ways and different styles of doing things. And
Yeah.
we need to honor that. And there is very much that kind of strong arm effect when it and where's your closed captions? Not everybody
Mm.
can actually sit there and listen to you. Sometimes you
Yeah.
need to read it, right?
Yeah.
And where's that speed control? Because
Yeah.
I am a verbal processor, but I am a
Mhm.
visual learner.
Mm.
So like I don't need to hear you talking like this, right? Which
Oh,
which
I
is
am a double speed.
like
Everything is on
yeah,
double speed
yeah,
in my world.
and for everybody's watching this, it's like, yes, the way we're talking right now would not be good for a webinar. Like you should speak clearly and be a little bit
Yes.
slower so that way those who also need to hear you at a slower
Yeah.
space, can, right?
Yeah.
And for the purpose of like automated captions, right? So those can keep up with
Mm.
you and be as close to accurate as possible. But it is that the thing it's like I truly I will not watch one if you don't show me how long of a time
Yes.
that's going to happen, so I can then choose and know, am I committing to 2 minutes or 20?
Yeah.
Like what's this video for? Even if it's on somebody's sales page, but
Mm.
like we're for the sake of this webinar, it's like I'm going to assume that it's an hour, but I have no idea.
Yeah.
So if I am not joining you live and I'm watching a recording, I need to know what I'm time committing to.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a how dare you not give me speed controls and how dare you not let me like turn on closed caption. Something that I said earlier where I was talking about how that the ones that pretend to be live, like it's very obvious that they're fake. We want to make sure that everybody knows that when we talk about a recorded one, we're not saying that that's the same thing as a default fake one. Right. So
Yeah.
just because it's like they heard me say this and then they heard you say that. And we want to make sure that everybody
Mm.
knows that we're talking about separate things. It's when
Yeah.
people are like, "Hey, tell me in the chat what's going on," and they made that like 3 months ago, and it
Or a
goes
year
on
ago.
autoplay, and
Yeah.
yeah, and all of the chat is fake and bots. Like those are the ones that we're talking about. There is
Yeah.
nothing wrong with recording one, so that way people, whether it's a replay or whether it is like an evergreen on demand
Mm.
option, that people can watch that. So I wanted to make sure that that distinction was clear as we were talking about that. A little bit of a jargon
Yeah.
break.
But I think as well, like with webinars, like back in the webinar heyday of probably I don't know what that would have been, 2010, 2012, like, somewhere around then when people first discovered, hey, like we can stream, we can do these things on the internet and
Yeah.
every marketer was like, ooh, let's do this. And that was before there even was the technology to make it evergreen and to fake live it.
Yeah.
I think what happened was people sort of realized that it's actually a lot of hard work to keep turning up live for the webinar. So they were like, all
Yeah.
right, well, so how could we, make it look like we are live?
Yeah.
And that's where that original sort of evergreen webinar software came from. And it basically faked the live. It faked the live experience. People put these recordings up as if they were live. And they did have the, hey, where are you joining me from? Like, comment in the chat kind of thing, which back then people weren't savvy to the fact that it wasn't live. And that's why then it worked. It was, kind of a form of trickery and people got away with it
Oh
because they
yeah.
didn't understand. Whereas now our audience, the world is so much more savvy because this type of presentation, this type of marketing has been around for so long. It's not new. So we need to evolve with how it's going. And from a tech perspective, it actually simplifies everything. And one of the best ways that I see now to do a webinar is simply have a registration and it goes to literally a landing page with the video on
Yeah.
it. And someone can then just
Yeah.
watch it. There's no, having to jump through hoops and pick times and all that kind of thing because people are very aware and you're no longer saying, come and see this live class. It's on at 2 o'clock. You're saying, watch my on demand. Like we're in the Netflix era, like so far past that, where no one wants to wait until 4 o'clock on a Friday. They're like, hello, I'd like to watch it right now, please. So, taking away that and you can still do a lot of the marketing off the back of it, off that registration. But yeah, and there's another trend as well, but I'll just check back in with you that I've noticed that I thought would be helpful in terms of tech before we talk about more the sales aspect of webinar. So have
Yeah,
you got
yeah,
any
yeah,
other?
and, like, before we dig into that contents piece, right? Because that's where my brain is going, and I'm like, "No, wait, 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 we're talking about platforms, we're talking about platforms."
Yes.
And this is the other thing where it's, that distinction again for everybody who's, like, listening to us. It's like whenever we say webinars, we're including master classes. We're
Yes.
including pick a name, Sue. It's like, what are the
Yeah.
other names that people call these things?
Sometimes
But it's
people call them
basically
like a workshop or like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, which to me is different, but it doesn't have to be to
Yes.
everybody else, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, basically you're presenting information that relates to something that you're going to sell in the back end, and you're going
Yeah.
to, like give people a pitch, right?
Yeah.
So whatever label somebody puts on it at some point, it's like this is we're just using like the kind of original name for it for webinar, and just kind of talking about what yeah like what are those different options, and what have we outgrown, and what have we learned from, so what else are you seeing on that tech front?
Well, one of the things I'm seeing on the tech front, and I've experienced it myself, and I freaking love it, is when people are getting their webinar presentation, especially if it was something that was live, and as well as putting it in visual form onto a landing page for a replay and directing people to a replay, they're doing things like creating a podcast version, like a private
Yes,
podcast,
yeah.
so that you can then listen. Like I don't have a lot of time for video content because I can't do two things at once while I'm watching a video, but I can walk, I can do housework, I can do other things. And I find myself listening to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. And, again, that could be a reflection of my demographic. And, other demographics may not be that way. But there's been a lot of a trend towards, supplying different types of content, like, you're talking about captions before, but also providing things in audio format is really helpful for people that like to consume content that way. So making the content as accessible as possible is really, really helpful. So I've really been enjoying people that have been doing that audio version of the
Yeah.
presentation. And want to start, bringing that into my own business as much as possible. But also, and I don't know whether this is a trend, it's just something that I've noticed over the last few months. And I'm not sure whether it's because people are trying to get more attention outside of that original register for the webinar to people that didn't register. But people who have podcasts, I've noticed a number of people recently have put that webinar as a podcast episode after they've presented the
Yes.
webinar to their entire
Yeah.
podcast. So again, I think it's just, that it's kind of taking that concept. I've done it where people have used like a private podcast tool, and they've said, "Hey, if you couldn't make it and you don't want to watch the replay, get this on a private podcast feed," which can be a nice way to give limited access. But I just have found it interesting that people have bypassed that still and just gone, "Here, it's up on the podcast." And I wonder if people, are doing this a similar thing with YouTube if they have a YouTube channel. Where they're actually, basically broadcasting they do their webinar as a YouTube live. And not only are they doing that so that they have it live, but then it's living on YouTube. Um, so it's again about that, meeting people where they're at. And before you were mentioning about
Yeah.
people that are doing essentially a similar thing as a webinar, but doing these like live trainings and live masterclasses on platforms like
Mhm.
Instagram and TikTok and other places. So it's, thinking about your audience. Where is your audience most likely? Like, what are they most likely to do? And if your audience is definitely skewing to a younger demographic, doing something as a, Instagram or TikTok live stream or something along those lines is going to meet them where they're at. And, instead of making them jump through the hoop of like, registering for a webinar and waiting for a certain time and, showing up at 3 o'clock and
Yeah, and that kind of like helps us like segue into that content piece, because one of the one of my own like mental hiccups with going from a straight like webinar masterclass style recording into a podcast feed is, what about if you have visuals? Right?
mm,
Versus like recording one specifically for audio, that, like where is that line? Where is, because if you're talking about just going from a Zoom or a Demio into a Facebook or an Instagram, well, you can use things like StreamYard, right? So
Mm,
it still has that same look. People can still see your slides. They can still have all of
mm.
those things, and it just pops up on 1,000 different,
Yeah, yeah,
platforms and,
yeah.
and YouTube and everywhere else. Whereas, like, if you're going audio only, like, do you need to either decide ahead of time? It's like, I know my humans are going to consume this better on audio, so I'm going to use like minimum visuals, and I'm going to make sure to like auditorially talk about everything. Do
Mm,
you or if you're like, oh, this was really good, at what point will people still understand the point and the
mm.
purpose and the things that we're doing without the visuals, where I maybe I need to record a special one, or maybe I can use this recording but also like pop in access to my slides or a PDF workbook, so it's like, where do you
And
see that
yeah.
on it?
Well, I think there's value in both, but where I have experienced it myself, it's not just that this random recording pops up. It's like fully explained. Like this is a recording of a presentation, and if you do prefer to watch it visually, or if you want to see this content, here's how you get it, and then linking through to that replay page. So it's making it
Yes.
accessible, but it's also setting the expectation in the beginning. So you're listening to it knowing
Yeah.
that it's an audio of a live recording. So even if you're not seeing everything on the screen, um, it's like maybe you're getting 80% of it, but it's still really helpful. So, in my experience,
Yes.
if you wanted to know more, then maybe you might go and check some of that stuff out. But as long as you're being conscious. Like for me, if I was doing something like an actual software tutorial, that's not great audio content.
Right. It's like,
That is
click here. Where?
yeah, yeah, that's terrible audio content. However, if I was
Yeah.
talking about the strategy behind doing something, that
Mhm.
is great on audio. So it's again about sort of picking that thing. And if you do know that you are going to put it onto a podcast from the beginning, like you said, thinking about that and being like, well, how, this graph or whatever that I'm putting on here may not translate well. So how could I explain that in a different way? And just sort of being a little bit more conscious. Maybe there's like one part where you're just like, no, I really need this on here. This is really important. So there's one part that you sort of, and as well, I've heard people say, hey, if you're just listening to this, like this is something that you won't get the full experience, make sure to watch for this bit.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I've
Which
experienced
is
that.
a beautiful point to bring into all of your content, right? So we can like make this that last piece that we'll talk about on webinars, because I think that it bleeds into the setup, into the expectations,
Yeah.
into the whole experience for people, and not doing it in any sort of accidental or intentional slimy way. And that is that transparency, right?
Mm,
Everything from, this is an audio version and this is what's going to happen, to even when you're actually like what you're talking about is you introduce the entire content under today I'm going to teach you this, right? We're going
yeah.
to walk through this. Like, you're giving them what they came for,
Yeah.
but then you're also telling them up at the front, and at the end, I'm going to let you know how you can carry this work on into, the rest of your
Yeah.
business, to the rest of your life, into future endeavors, right? It's like whatever kind of phrasing that you want, but you are setting people up from the very beginning to know, yes,
Yeah.
I'm going to deliver what I promise, but I'm also going to make that invitation, right? Make that
Yeah.
sales transition. We're going to talk about this. And having that transparency from like, it touches every single piece of it. And I think that just gives that like such a better audience experience, to begin with, as well
Mm,
as the speaker. You don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm about to go into this awkward transition and suddenly I'm going to sell to people, and here I have been talking to them. And it just kind of creates that environment, for everything all the way around, right?
mm. Yeah, definitely. And as well, like before we sort of go off the tech and more into the sales, one last thing with that audio content is, sometimes like if you're considering doing a webinar, there's a few different parts of it that can feel daunting. One part is writing the content. Whatever you're going to do, you will need to create content. So there is no escaping that. If you're going to teach anything, like you will have to create that. However, if making slides is something where you're like, oh my god, this is so hard, it's going to take me 3 weeks, and that part of it is putting you off wanting to do it, or if the thought of presenting slides on a screen makes you incredibly anxious and you're like, that's just not my personality. I freak out. That's where doing something in an audio format means you still get, a lot of the benefits of a webinar without having to actually present a webinar. I would suggest to, sometimes try and push yourself. My first webinar was literally horrific, like so horrific. I was having a panic attack almost before I started.
Oh,
Like my beautiful daughter was like giving me like stress relieving foot massages because I was like, and the whole red face, red neck, everything, because it is, it's a stressful thing if you've never put yourself into that position before to present. So I would suggest pushing yourself a little bit, because since doing that first one, I've done many webinars and now I'm actually feel really confident with doing it. So there's that aspect. But also, if you're at the point where you're not doing it because the idea of it is giving you so much anxiety, it's just not happening, that's where doing it in an audio format. And, whether that's something where you split it up, instead of doing an hour-long presentation, you split it into 4 like podcast episodes and you release it as a private podcast. Like it's about that platform thing. A webinar doesn't have to be literally slides on a screen on Zoom. It can be in multiple different formats and it can still be helpful and it can still work. So yeah. Yay. But let's talk about the sales aspect of a webinar, because that is sometimes what gives people the anxiety and the cold sweats.
Yeah, and that goes back to that transparency piece, right? It's like you're priming yourself as well as the audience for what's going on. And whenever you have that clear distinction towards the end, where you're like, you finish the topic, you do your recap, right? So people are directly connecting what they just went through with what you had promised and what you told them, like each of these things were going to be. Then after that, it's like, I'm so excited to take your questions about this content. And then after we're done with these content questions, I'm going to tell you about, right? And that's like your segue, your introduction to it. And you can always say, if at any point you need to leave, go for it. The replay will be here. But, I would love to be able to answer any questions that you have about that, as well as, the next part that I'm going to talk about. Right. So you're not like holding people down and they have to stay, or they're just like, being blindly walked around and have no idea as to what's going on. So that both of those are when the people participating, as well as the human giving the talk, is like, oh, this is so awkward, or oh, this is so, because you kind of, you'll even if you're having palpitations and you're having a hard time doing the presentation part and it doesn't come naturally, you will still kind of like get into a flow, because you're talking about your passion, you're talking about the things that you love and that you enjoy. And then you suddenly feel like you have to talk like this and that everything is going to happen. And it's on
like there's a
today and get it right now. And it's like, whoa, where did the human go? Like what just happened? And, and that's part of it. And you can still practice that transition, but it's giving yourself permission to be upfront. You're being upfront with yourself. You're being upfront with everybody else. And you're letting people know like what's going on and how it's going to happen. And you're also like making those very clear links to prove to yourself as well as to others that you've ticked those boxes, that you've taught what you said, that you're going to, answer questions and allow people to have that implementation time. But you're also going to tell them about the thing, that you came here to tell them about. Right. And for me, that was why I said I very much think about workshops as different. And before people went on this hunt for another name for webinar and started saying masterclass, even masterclass used to be like, it wasn't meant as that sales vehicle, right? Whereas now, at least in our online business world, they're synonymous. And it's basically just, a new gloss on something that already existed. Right. Whereas like I am for myself, and no one here has to think about it this way, but for my own like lineation, I'm thinking of a workshop as a very interactive, stop me, ask me questions in the middle. We're going to do exercises together. It has that kind of interactive element and feel, right? Which again goes back to transparency, because just because you're using a word in a certain way doesn't mean that your audience has always experienced that word in that way. So
Yeah.
whatever you choose to call this, make sure that you're also giving that explanation. You're setting up those expectations. You're letting people know what's going on. And I almost want to say, like, I will promise you that you will have an easier time doing it whenever you allow that space and that breath, and you're not feeling like you have that card up your sleeve, the whole time.
Mm,
That's like, what
mm.
I'm like, oh, am I going to get caught? Oh, are people going to hate me? Oh my God, is
Yeah.
everybody going to run away? I
Yeah.
mean, it is natural for people to drop off. And honestly, that's not always because they don't want to hear about what you're presenting at the end. It can also be because they've already sat there with you for an hour, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It can also be like a straight up timing thing. And that's where we have to get out of our own heads and get out of our
Mm.
own judgments, right?
Yeah.
Which takes practice. There's no
Yes.
judgment on having judgments on yourself.
Yeah.
It takes practice, and it takes figuring out what you need to kind of self soothe and
Yeah.
be like, this is not a reflection on me personally. This is
Yeah.
people doing their own thing, being in their own world. Because with conversion numbers, how they go down, even though the audience is also going down, it's still 2 to 3% conversion for someone who's in your live event, right?
Exactly. Which, if you
And
think
and
about
so
it, 100 people will be there, which means 2 or 3 will buy. So when you take the
yeah.
expectation away and go, well, percentage-wise, it
Yeah, and
changes
be
your
like, I'm gonna get
perspective.
80 people today, and I'm so excited. And if you do, that's fine. But also, if you're like, oh my God, 80 people have left,
Yeah.
I'm horrible, I'm awful. What
Yeah.
like, and you're using that as like a judgment on what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
When you've already ticked the box of making sure that you delivered as promised, when you've been transparent, when you've laid all this stuff out, when you've given people realistic time expectations, when
Yeah.
you've said we're going to be on for an hour and it's already like ticking into an hour and a half or 2 hours, right? That's not
Guilty.
like honoring other people's times. So there's going to be a natural detraction at that point, right? So
Yeah.
it's having whatever you need in place. Like, one of the things I tell my private clients is, have a weighted blanket in your lap. It's okay. like
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody
Yeah.
can see it.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's like, have something soft that you can, like, touch. Or,
Yeah.
have a mug, a cup of coffee, even if it's empty. But
Yeah.
just to kind of like have something that you can put in your hand, because that gives you that, I'm safe. I'm safe. What I'm doing might be scary. It might be new, but I'm safe.
Yeah.
And that again brings that energy. It brings,
Yeah.
and I think, Sue, to like go all the way back around to what you were saying at the very beginning, that live element. I think that's where there can be a bit of a disconnect from the recorded element, where the recorded element, we're 1,000% in our heads, judging absolutely everything, wondering how
Yeah.
much we're going to have to edit.
Yeah.
Whereas when it's live, there, even if you're nervous, even if you're sweaty, even if you're all the things, there's still that element of what is what is. We're here together. We're sharing
Yeah.
each other's energy. We've got this stuff going. And
Yeah.
and you can recreate that in yourself for a recorded. You just have to know that that means you need something that's going to make you feel good, right?
Yeah.
And everybody can discover their own version of that. Everything from camera angles and lighting to the things like an empty cup to fidget with, or making sure, like, getting your hair did. It's like whatever it is that makes somebody feel comfortable, and it is okay for you to discover that as you go, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you don't need foot massages anymore. You might want them, but you probably don't require them to get through it.
No, it's so funny because the first time I did a webinar, I spent hours preparing and did tests the day before. The whole weekend was like all geared up around this one hour. But now I'm at the point where I'm like, oh, webinar starting in 10 minutes. Better make sure the computer's turned on. Like, get a drink of water, and
Yeah.
that's kind of and it's that mindset shift. But speaking of that, though, like, the one thing that I see where I see people getting tripped up with webinars is they put so much pressure on the webinar. And,
Yes.
even I
Yes.
just
Yes.
saw
Yes.
a few days ago in a Facebook group, someone was like, I've done this video. Is it good enough? Like, and it's kind of like, that one recording, that's just one version of your webinar. Like, your webinar will get better and tighter, and you will refine it the more times you do it. So and when you are creating a webinar, like for the people that come live and those that watch it on the recording, that's just one version of the webinar. Like, you will have so many more opportunities throughout your, launch, throughout your career, to make more webinars and to do more webinars and to get better at them. And, maybe the more you do it, the less awkward the transition will be, because you'll work out better ways to say it. You'll get more comfortable in
Yeah,
the fact that you are
very much so.
presenting and asking for the sale. And also, the thing to think about, which I think people sort of neglect, and I think it comes from that funnel world where everything is based on conversion rates. And if you get 80 or 100, let's pick 100 because it's easy for someone who's not good at maths. So if you get 100 people showing up, and you expect 3 people are going to buy, and that doesn't work out, then you're like, oh, that whole webinar was a failure. It was
Yeah.
a waste of time. Yet what if there were 10 people in that audience who your product was perfect for, but now it's just not the right time? And the fact that they came to that webinar means next time you launch it, they're already like, oh, I'm so glad you relaunched this, because I was, now I am ready. And I think it's that, looking at it based on the today view, where every time someone gets that touch point with you, and especially through something like a webinar, where it is that, that accelerated version of getting trust. If someone's sitting watching an hour of your content, that every minute they watch longer is more, the connection is deepening. And if you look at it, that webinar that they've just watched has significantly has taken their trust level of you from that to that, but maybe they need it to go further. And the next
Yeah.
time you do a webinar, that's the trigger. And again, it's not everyone's the same. Like, some people are in a position where they can watch a webinar and go, oh my God, that's awesome. That's what I need. I'll just buy it. Other people need more nurturing. They need a bit more loving. They need a bit more like, oh, do I really need it? I want to look at the other options that are around. Is Sue or Tracy the right person to teach me this? Do I even, is this what I even want to be doing? Am I just jumping at it because I saw a
Exactly.
webinar?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many things. And I think, like, viewing the webinar as just one way to connect with people, instead of like, I got X number of people, it was less than I wanted, the whole thing was a failure, is like sort of taking it out of that individual, this webinar view, into a holistic view of your business, and how every time you do that is just giving you an opportunity to connect further with your audience. And also, it's that concept before of what you're saying, is making the webinar something that, regardless of whether they buy or not, they're still learning from you. It's still a great
Yes.
experience whether or not
Yes.
they buy. And at the end, if you just focus on giving someone a great experience and learning something through that webinar, and then you just happen to give them an invitation on how they can learn more and work with you further at the end, it also takes the pressure out, because you're not like, this webinar has to convert. Like, you're like, all right, how can I make this webinar a great experience, and then invite anyone who's enjoyed it to work with me more? I'm just giving them an invitation. I'm not like, come and
Right.
buy my stuff, which I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that pressure to do the sell can then make people almost like you said, oversell, or they fall off that cliff where they go from being a human to going, now I must do the sale.
And it
Please buy
has to
my
be this
stuff.
exact template and these exact word. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, we could do a whole episode on the pressures and the feeling around
Yes.
the sales part, because I have not just a lot of opinions, but like a lot of like tips and tricks that I run people through, that really helps with that. Right. But
Mm,
there was a part where you were talking about, that pressure. And for myself, like, I always think about it like, I applaud the people who come and are able to consciously make a decision that they know it's not right for them. That is
yes,
just as
totally.
strong and just as valuable to that human as it
Yep.
is to say, yes, I do need you. Right.
Yeah.
So our role isn't to get someone to say yes or no. Our role is to make sure that someone has a clear understanding of what's in it for them, what their life is going to look like whenever you join it, and how like all of these little pieces are going to come together.
Yep.
That's the actual job, not to force some form of a decision. That is a personal space for them. And it
Yep.
is just as honorable for them to be able to say, oh no, I don't need this right now, right, as it is to say, yes I do, or my favorite, not yet, right, because yet
Yeah.
is such a powerful word. But
Yep.
there again, it comes into, there's a concept in copywriting called the rule of one. And there's multiple pieces to it, but the one that I'll point out for this one is the fact that each piece has one job, and that is to get them to the next piece. So
Yeah.
the whole
Yep.
success of your business, the whole success of your life, and all the melodrama that plays out in our own head isn't reliant on that one webinar. It has to
Yeah,
do like that
exactly.
webinar's job is to get people to the sales page or to the checkout page, right? And then that job is to get people to, to take the next step, as well as all the other pieces that came before the actual
Yeah,
webinar, right? From your
yeah,
pre-launch content to your actual launch content to the invitations to the reminders to the being there.
yeah.
And think about it more like you are spreading out that responsibility.
Mm,
Yeah. So that way, if you put too much on one thing, it'll break just from the
yeah,
weight of it all. And we
yeah,
break mentally and emotionally from the weight of it all. It's
yeah,
like, oh, okay, let me take a breath. Let me
yeah.
remember that each piece has its purpose, and they build on each other. And that's something that I would love for everybody to remember. It's like, the whole everything in your identity doesn't fall on a quote unquote success
Mm.
of things based on someone else's metrics and decisions that they've made.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got this picture in my head as you're saying that of it being like a path of stepping stones, and
Yeah.
and some one person might need to step on every single stepping stone. Someone else might feel more comfortable jumping over three or four of them and going, "Oh, look, I'm happy to skip ahead to there." And that's what you're saying before about honoring people in their journey. Everyone in your audience is going to be different, and some people need more stones. Some people need to step, and they
Yep.
need to feel comfortable, and they need to like go, all right, I'm confident this part, then I'm going to go to the next part. Other someone else might, almost like do the whole thing like I'm thinking on those game shows where they like run over so they think they're going to fall into
Yeah.
the water. And that's,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And that's where, like you said, like if you put all the pressure on one piece, it's like if that one piece in that thing fails because you're like, this is the thing, and if it doesn't work, my business is doomed. That's a lot of pressure on you as well. And that's going to change how you show up
Exactly.
on a webinar.
Exactly.
And it's going to change
Right.
how you invite. Like instead of just inviting people in, you're going to be
Yeah.
subconsciously almost pressuring them and really kind of going a bit harder on the sales, which then feeds into that whole thing that webinars are super salesy and make you feel icky because you're kind of like it's almost like that self-fulfilling prophecy.
Very, very much so, and this again goes right back to that transparency. It's deciding for yourself how comfortable you are. And this can take time. This is a personal
Mm,
decision, but it's like how comfortable you are with sharing vulnerability and
yeah.
sharing transparency and
Yeah.
saying, I'm really excited about this, but I'm going to be honest, this is the first time I've done this, or this is the second time that I've
Mm,
covered this material like this. I
mhm.
know this material works. I've done it in XYZ. It's like
Yeah.
there's a little credibility drop for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's like, but to do it here when I'm really excited about it, it's like I love that this is a place of grace, and I'm excited for your questions, and
Yeah.
we're just gonna like go through this. Right.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that like you can have by doing it live, you can
Yeah.
have by having those pieces where you kind of massage through that, right? And
Yeah.
your level of openness, right? It's not a matter of honesty, it's a matter of openness. That can differ. That can differ based on, did you come from corporate? Did you come from academic? Did you come
Mm,
from entrepreneurship? Did you come from a family where it had to be perfect and everything was right? And if you
mm.
dare showed weakness, everybody would pounce on you, right?
Yeah.
Which really makes things like for yourself, and that's kind of again, it's like how are you going to get comfortable with it? What do you need to do for yourself? And you are creating a community. So no matter what anybody else's community feels like that you've been in, what do you want yours to feel like? Right? If that community was your home, what do you want it to feel like? Do you want it to be warm and cozy? Do you want it to be like very like minimalist, neat and clean, but have like segmented places for everything, right? It's again, it's not a right or wrong. It's figuring out what that is for you, and then allowing that to inform how you operate in your business, and being willing to do it with those shakes, and being willing to just straight up tell people, I'm excited, but this is new, and here we go. And like, all of these things that we've been talking about, it recaps into, yes, they are very much still relevant, but it doesn't have to be the way that you've seen them in the past. It can be the way that fits who you are, how you want to run things, what's going to best highlight and show off what it is that you're actually trying to do, and give that audience that maximum understanding, right? And then whatever tech you need to overlay, there is a type that is available. whatever style that you don't like, there's a way to do it that is effective because you're the one doing it. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say we both very much so believe in the medium of this. It's just kind of having that permission to figure out, the way that works best for you. And I think that made this a very good little chat for us today, to talk about, yeah, because there's a lot of pressure on these launch mechanics, and all this other kind of stuff. And again, a reminder to everybody listening that if you're like, oh, well, what about this part of a launch? Oh, or what about this part of it? Let us know. Submit it as a question, and we'll talk about it too. Just like this one, that the webinar was something that came up this week, and we were like, all right, we've got things to say about it. So let's hit record and let's talk about it, right? Thank you for joining me here on Digital Business Your Way. Be sure to check out the show notes for all the links mentioned today. And while you're there, I'd love for you to rate and review the show. And if you have a topic or question you want me to answer, I want to hear it. Head to tracypatterson.com/AMA and ask me anything about business. If I don't know it, I'll bring it up with one of my guests. And until next week, be well and have some fun.